Matt, what is going on, man? Welcome to Dad Edge.
Dude, so happy to be here, Larry.
Yes, and I see you're free of the golden handcuffs,
Oh, it
right?
feels so good. I've got a lot of freedom in life right now.
Yeah, man. This is a huge topic. Men who are starting businesses, men who are doing like the side hustle. That's a term I was became familiar with back a few years back. But for you, man, let's just get started here. What does your family situation look like before we get into the grassroots of things here?
Yeah, it's blended. I'm previously divorced, three kids from that marriage. They're older, 15, 13, and 11 right now. Remarried 7 years ago, and we have a 2-year-old. So four kids in total, blended and blessed.
That's awesome, man. So
Mhm.
you said 13, I'm sorry, 15, 13, 11, and then
And
two.
two,
And
yes.
then what's the mix as far as the kids go?
Two girls, two older girls, and two younger boys.
Oh, so you got two and two, man.
Yeah.
Kind
And
of
I get to coach
yeah.
baseball like you too, which gives me great joy.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Baseball, like the parents, do the parents kind of like, what age do you coach?
11-year-olds right now. So we're just
Okay.
going into the last part of Little League.
Okay. So
They're intense people.
okay, great. So yeah, I have found that seems to be like the age. It's like the 9, 10, 11s where it's no more about like, just fun. Oh, they're so cute. And it's like, no, sweep the leg. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah. So tell me about, I would love for you to just share, um, just some high level things about what it means for you to just some life lessons that you want to pass down, that's most meaningful for your boys, but also most meaningful for your girls.
Mm. Man, to be a boy, to embrace the hidden feminine energy that we all have, to understand that when you know both the masculine and the feminine, you are a much more capable, intriguing, exciting, beautiful person in this world. We get taught to suppress those things: empathy, being vulnerable, just showing any emotion, right? I think we were growing up that way. We saw that modeled for us. But when you learn to harness that, and feminine does not mean female, but the feminine energies that we have, the ability to connect with other human beings, which I saw role modeled through females most of my life. I want to show that to my boys, to really be that person in front of their mother, in front of their stepmother, to be that person. Then with my girls, Larry, I think about being assertive, being self reliant. Going back to one of my heroes, Ralph Waldo Emerson, the ability to carve your own path and not fall into boxes or typecasts and just pick a sensible path. I see so many powerful women that are just unleashing themselves, and I want to show that to them too. Even as my oldest, she's in high school now, thinking about college. She's trying to like pick a path. I'm like, let's see about the range of options in your life. What do you love? What gives you joy, excitement? Can we give a little energy into that and see what you could become? Just trying to balance that out. We've got masculine, we've got feminine, and I want them both to feel all that they have available to them.
I really like that. I was actually going back and forth with a podcast guest here recently, and we were talking about just young men in general. Like, I think you and I. How old are you, by the way, Matt?
39.
Okay, so we're not too far off in age, but
Mhm.
we were talking about this, which is this being like our generation, me and you. We were raised by some pretty tough dudes, right? And I think they were raised by dudes who are tougher. Like, so our grandparents, right? I mean, if you really look at our grandparents, like they survived like the depression and world wars and Vietnam drafts and like all kinds of things that, yes, we are faced with a ton of challenges, right? But men were seriously, they were made of iron, I think, back then. And then they raised a generation, and I think they did a really good job with it in some degree. And but there were a couple of things missed too, because I think you can strike exactly what you're talking about, which is this really cool balance, which I remember being raised by my stepdad when I was from the age of 5 to 10. And if I ever cried, if I got hurt, whether it was physically or what emotionally, whatever, my dad would actually hit me and say, "Stop crying. Only babies cry." And I was just like literally that was the lesson. Like, shut up, stop crying, only babies cry, no matter what it was, even if I was physically hurt. But I think that's the way his dad taught him to navigate.
Mm,
Plus he was military. So it's like, dude, shut up. It's don't be about your feelings, right? But I think we can strike this really good balance because I think you can actually be very masculine, but you can also be an empathetic listener to your wife at the same time, right? You can literally be, a great conversationalist, a great person who connects to somebody else and still be masculine. I don't think and that's exactly what you're saying. You don't have to choose one way or the other. You can actually have both.
yeah. And just understand you pull on those levers in different contexts. Sometimes you need to be more empathetic, more vulnerable. Sometimes you need to actually slam the hammer for your own sake. If someone's doing something stupid and your kid is about to do something they should not do, you've got to be assertive in that moment. We can't be soft. And we've got to
Yeah.
understand how do we use the tools at our disposal, which we need to build and sharpen to make sure that we can use the tools when we need them.
Yep. Exactly, man. How were you raised? Like, I know even on your website, you have a photo with your dad.
Yeah.
But what was that? What was your upbringing like?
Man, so a few different aspects jump out to me, Larry. So military household too. He was in the Air Force. Very conservative household, and that took over in many ways. Follow in line, just plug away in the military. That came into my head, right? Get 20 years in a
Yeah.
pension. A good job is a good thing. Also, a religious household. Grew up Catholic, and I have this term now. I didn't have it at the time, but we were conditioned to be God fearing, and that is follow the rules or you end up in hell. And I remember crying myself to sleep thinking about all the sins I've had and the things I've done wrong per commandments and rules and what well meaning people around me, even including family members, were telling me. I would just lose it, like crying myself to sleep, 9, 10, 11 years old, about what was going to happen to me and my family. And so this gets programmed in, right? Like we've got to follow the rules. We've got to pick sensible things that carries through to getting into a good school. And I failed getting into a good school out of high school and getting into college. I tried a few times and finally got into one I wanted. So I was like, all right, I got in. I jumped through the first hoop. And then that began like a sequence of hoop jumping. Got out of college, got into a sensible career path. It was in management consulting, and that seemed good. And I was doing well, getting promoted in the ranks and these sorts of things because that's what I saw as success role model around me. Then on the personal side, again, conditioned to follow rules and just be worthy. I got married at 24 and had 3 kids by the time I was 28. So,
Wow.
yeah, a lot. Now, outside, people would say, "Matt, you're living the American dream. You've bought a house, you've got an amazing job, you've got a large family. You're crushing it." Of course, my ego says, "Thank you, thank you, thank you. This feels good." And I found all my self-worth in the job because my wife at the time was taking care of the kids. I was out there traveling, making the dough, providing a living. And that's where I found everything for me. It's like plugging into that system. It was a system that I was good at, knew how to play office politics, all that stuff in the corporate world. Um, Eventually, stuff hit the fan, but I'll see if you have any thoughts so far.
Sorry, I kind of broke up there. You said eventually what?
Can you hear me, Larry? Can you hear
Kind of
me?
lost you there for a second. Yeah, I can
Okay.
now. It said eventually something.
Okay. Okay. I'm sure we'll edit this stuff, but eventually I got to the point where my life hit a wall. But I want to see if you have any thoughts so far on the storyline.
So it's pretty crazy that we're having this conversation. So I was raised Catholic myself. For a while there, I did have a dad who was military, right? Very kind of hard nosed. Um, the Catholic, here's the interesting thing. We're still Catholic to this day. We're actually very active Catholics. Like, I
Mhm.
actually love being Catholic now, but I've kind of I've redefined what it means to be Catholic, and not what a Catholic is, but for me in general and for my family. But what I found is that when I was raised Catholic, and I think some Catholics can maybe attest to the same experience, that there was the term Catholic guilt is very apparent. Like they kind of pull these levers of like, I remember like being like, my grandmother was very Catholic. She actually worked for the Jesuits. And I'll never forget when, we would sporadically go to church, me and my mom, and my grandmother would see me. She'd be like, "Did you go to church on Sunday?" I'm like, "No." She's like, "Oh, have you been to confession?" And I'm like, "No, grandma." She's like, you know, you're going to go to hell if you don't. I mean, like literally, I'm like 6, 7 years old, 8 years old. I'm like, "Oh my God, like what?" And, I remember being raised Catholic. And I think the overall arching feeling that I got from like family and messages, and even I went to a Catholic school, was like, you cannot win. You're doomed. Like in a way, like I think that was, but I don't know if that was like more of a generational message, like that people just sort of kind of used because it was used on them. But, yeah, it was like that growing up. And, as it relates to your career, right? And I was in medical device sales. So like I graduated with a degree in sports medicine with a minor in nutrition, didn't actually go into my field because actually I was like, oh my God, like my field in corporate wellness, which was what I was going to do, it pays like $30,000 a year. I owe $60,000 just in college bills alone. How in the world am I even going to make ends meet? Went into pharmaceutical sales, then went into medical device sales, was making wonderful 6-figure income. And the interesting thing is that I always thought this money would buy me happiness. And what I found is it felt more like a shovel. It made some things easier. I'm not going to discount that, but it felt like in a way like a shovel. Like I was like, okay, well now we're, a part of this lifestyle. And I'm not saying like anybody's like we've never bought a new car in our entire life, but we weren't buying something that the wheels were falling off either. Our house was, middle class. Like, but at the same token, I was like, I don't want to move backwards, right? So I got to keep doing this. And of course, with the demands of more kids came more money, and then it became more apparent that I had to just work harder and longer. And I'll never forget, man. You had a moment in your career. I had a moment one time where I had just landed this new job, and I thought the job was actually going to be less travel because at the time I was traveling Monday and Tuesday, sometimes Wednesday with my old job. Took a new job because I thought it was going to be less travel. And I'll never forget being in the Orlando airport talking to my wife. And I had just gotten my travel for the next 6 months. And literally for the next, and this was all my corporate meetings, all of my team meetings, all of my travel with my reps. I was literally going to be gone Sunday night through Thursday, or Monday morning through Thursday, every single week for the next 6 months, minus 3 weeks in there that I'd be home. And I'll never forget my wife being like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, I thought this was less travel. And I felt insanely trapped. Like, what are we going to do? And it was a hard feeling, man. And one of those feelings too, that as a highly compensated employee for a company, it's like, oh, they don't have a problem in the world. Like they never feel that way. And what I found is the higher ranks I got in executive management, the more people that I worked with hated their life. And they would always say one thing: I actually love being a sales rep more than in this role.
100%. It's like the same reason Maverick didn't want to become a
Yeah.
general. He wanted to keep flying planes because that's where he found the greatest joy, right? And you look up and you see, well, I actually don't want that
Yeah.
life whatsoever. That looks miserable. But yeah, yeah, I'm right
Yeah.
with you. It's just like
100%.
when you
Yeah.
understand what you're getting into, at first it seems exciting, but then you find the lifestyle creep, that level of inflation comes up too. And then you're kind of trapped and you're left wondering, I've built it up so far. I have to keep spinning this wheel or I'm screwed. And you feel this trap feeling, and then you've got like the guilt with your wife, like you have, you got that call and you have to go tell her, and that the sensations that go through your body knowing that you have to convey that message, it's horrifying and it leaves you crippled. For me, I mean, having tough conversations with my wife on things like I need to lay out what my travel schedule is and let her hear that's one of the worst feelings to me in my past self, was having to share that news. And I think a lot of people can empathize with that, whether they have to take a call on vacation, or they have to travel when they don't want to, or miss a kid's recital. That stuff is probably the hardest news to give your family because it's against your values, and yet you feel compelled to follow whatever corporate says.
True, and there's this internal battle that's constantly going on. I literally just saw this video on Instagram today that if you are a provider, you're a hardworking husband and father, you're constantly faced with the challenge of like, I need to work hard because I need to support them. And because I work hard, I also miss things that I swore to myself I would never miss, or do things that I would never do, or say I would be there and then suddenly I can't. It's this constant yin and yang, this constant battle that we face as hardworking men, but the battle is still there, correct?
Very much so. It's there. It's an
Yeah,
inner battle, and you've got to figure out how to deal with it so that you can be a better person with the people you care about most.
I agree. So what was I know your journey. It's really fascinating to me because you have your journey on your website that's actually lumped into three categories. One was caged,
Mhm.
one was uncaged, and then the final one, which I think is awesome, is mission focused. So I want you to go back to what were you doing when you were caged? You know, what were some of the good things, quote unquote good things that were there, but also some of the challenges that were there, and maybe this internal dialogue of like, man, I feel this on the outside, this looks one way, but on the inside, back here, it looks something different.
Yeah. So that first decade of my career, again, large family at the time, the job was providing great benefits, great compensation, a home, lifestyle, two cars, all the things the American dream says, right? And that felt really good. It felt good to provide. Even getting on the road, like travel points, hotel awards, every now and then I could take my family on little trips on the corporate dime, that sort of thing, right? But I remember specifically after about a decade in, after having my third kid, I was in Munich for a meeting I didn't really even need to be at, but I convinced myself I need to be there. I need to go to Germany. And I remember being in my hotel room in Munich and just collapsing on the bedroom floor because I realized I was missing my son's birthday. To be in a meeting I didn't really need to be in. And I was on another continent doing stuff that didn't mean anything to me really, but it was to prove a point, to prove I'm worthy. Wasn't that necessary? And I'm like, what am I missing? What am I leaving behind? Over the next year, like this cascade of crazy events happened. I said, stuff hit the fan. My dad suddenly got diagnosed with brain cancer and he passed away. So that was a 3 month done. We found out, done. Lost him. Had
Oh
to
my
deal
God.
with mortality and him not being able to know his grandkids that were just brought into this world. And that was devastating. My marriage was taking a lot of hits. The corporate job did not help, ended up getting divorced. It was not the right situation, which in turn prevented me, the agreement prevented me from seeing my kids much. So I only got to see them 4 days a month going forward. That sucked. Still sucks. It's been almost a decade. And
Wow.
beyond that, just my mental health, like I was clinically depressed, anxious, on meds, lost 30 pounds. I became like a running obsessive, running at 11 o'clock at night after grad school. I don't know why I was even in grad school, to maybe to numb some pain, just to try to stay alive, just like be physically fit. But I was a mental and physical mess. So all within a year, everything came crashing down. There were a lot of problems, but I will say my devotion to the job hurt a lot. And I call that the corporate cage. That's a term I use and I have now. I didn't have the language at the time, Larry, but this was an environment, not that was happening to me. I was not sucked into it and it overtook my life. I said yes to all of this. I was a willing
Yeah.
participant, opting in to all the meetings, saying yes to all the projects, to the travel. I was not asserting myself. I had no agency. Looking back, I saw that. I no agency. I was Neo before the red pill. I was really just living in that matrix and everything hit the fan. And that's a point where I knew I have to be there for my kids. I'm divorced now. I'm
Yeah.
having to support them financially, which is a heavy load. The dad, in most cases in a divorce, gets the heavy financial burden. And that's a lot. I had that and I had to support them and I couldn't just leave the lucrative job. That's what I knew. That's knew how to make money and how to support them. So my task was, okay, either make this work or pretty much die is what it felt like. And I had to reinvent my relationship with the job so that I could be the dad and eventually, maybe again someday, a husband that I was proud of, be the person I was proud of. So I set a challenge to myself, Larry, which was, how do I take this demanding corporate environment and configure it to something that feels good to me? How do I run some experiments? How do I test what's possible, push the edges of my comfort zone, what I know is acceptable? And over a couple of years, I hired some coaches and mentors, and I was in therapy, and I found ways to drastically reduce the amount of time and energy being spent there. I actually reduced from 11-hour days average down to 5-hour days average. And again, no one really knew. I knew. I knew I had to do this or life was going to fall apart. It was out of necessity. Figured out how to reduce that time and energy, became healthier, had the time and presence to then be a good dad. Eventually, I did meet my soulmate. And fortunately, we married, and she said yes, even with all the complexity that I brought to the relationship, which was, God bless her. Um, and, that's where I started to see that corporate didn't have to be demanding. It wasn't all or nothing. I could turn it into a tool to support the life I wanted. So I started undertaking like Tim Ferriss stuff, like life design principles, 4-hour work week things. How do you make corporate work for you in service of the life you actually want? And then as time went on, I actually found this entrepreneurial bug inside of me. I had no idea that I ever wanted to be an entrepreneur. I thought at the high end, it was either like Bezos or Elon Musk running huge startups down to small mom and pop shops on Main Street. I didn't know any other entrepreneurs out there, didn't know what it would even look like. But I got into masterminds and some coaches that exposed me to a new world, a world that I know you know very well at this point. Peers and mentors of yours, I'm sure, Larry, that have showed you what it's like to live a freedom filled life, a passion based business that creates something for your family, which you're really proud of, creating real impact in this world. So COVID hit and I started that business, which was a coaching business. And I really started saying, how do I help the people that I used to be? There are many people that I know still trapped in the corporate cage. How do I help them become free, help them loosen up from that environment? How do they become healthier people, better family men and women? And how do they get to a state where they're proud? So I built a coaching business, ran that over COVID, and left corporate finally after a year and a half ago at this point. I've been out as a full-time entrepreneur after running it for a side business. And I just feel mission focused now. Like I said, I help people live uncaged. I see people in need, deep need, dire stakes, lives at stake, frankly, is how I view it. And I'm really proud to serve.
Man, I love that. What did you do corporately?
So management consulting, mostly in cybersecurity. So
Got it.
large companies all over the world, I would work with their technology organizations as they were getting bombarded by cyber attacks.
Wow. So former cybersecurity, now coach to help other people, leverage this, I guess I would call it not only a mindset, but also tools to either allow corporate to then work for you, right? Or then to start your own business. Is that correct?
Exactly it. The whole goal
Okay.
is to loosen the grips from corporate, make it manageable,
Yeah.
turn it in, basically put it on autopilot and say, we don't want to keep climbing the ladder at all costs, but we're going to maintain that environment, use it as a tool for the life we want. And I deeply, deeply believe that most people, especially high achievers in corporate, should explore entrepreneurship. I think it's an
Hmm.
exploration of self. It's a discovery of things you did not know about yourself, things you did not know you were capable of, limiting beliefs that are keeping you from being the person you're meant to be, and going through that transition of learning what it is to be an entrepreneur, even while doing it on the side, right? While keeping the main gig, doing it on the side, it forces you to become a different person, to want better things, to be a better father, to be a better husband, to be a better person of service in this world. And you just can't get that while working someone else's mission. I just don't see how it's possible, frankly.
Yeah, I'm gonna challenge that just a little bit, just and out of complete and total respect, because I think we can do that to some degree, and maybe that's part of like some of your levers to make corporate work for you. If you are like 100% like I am so passionate about this, and I know I'm working for somebody else, but it's so passionate. I'll share just one quick story with you.
Mhm.
There was one time in my entire career that I sold medical devices, and dude, I was on fire to do it. And I sold this product, and I was a manager for the product for a while. It's called the Plerex catheter. The Plerex catheter is an indwelling, sort of like small French chest tube that goes between, basically, it goes into the thoracic cavity. And normally people, when they have to have chest drainage, there's a massive, like, basically garden hose that's sticking out of your chest. You cannot leave the hospital with something like that. You're hooked up to all kinds of crap, right? But the Plerex catheter was this thing. It was tiny, but it allowed patients who had end stage cancer to go home and pass away on hospice and not die in the hospital with a chest tube with a ton of pain. It allowed them to go home and allowed them to have palliative care and to reduce their pain. And when I interacted, man, with those patients, and you're you have a wife who's crying and saying thank you so much, for this, like, my husband actually gets to come home. And you see the impact of something like that, what that does for a family, and allows a patient to peacefully pass on their own terms. I was like, oh my gosh, like, I just felt so good about promoting and selling that product because I saw what it did for people. But I think that's also, to your point, that's an anomaly. I don't think that's the norm. In fact, I would say a lot of people, I don't know the statistics, but wasn't it like 82% of men drive to a job that they either dislike or despise completely?
Yeah. First off, let me say that's a beautiful exception to the general rule of thumb I'm talking about right now. That's amazing that you got to experience that, Larry. I can only imagine. My father was in hospice. Like, you can imagine the gift that you give to that family to experience, them passing away at home. I have a question for you is, in that state
Sure.
when you were feeling rewarded by being in that role, how long did it last?
That's a great question, because when you started talking about like taking calls on vacations and stuff like that, like, I was the direct person that people would contact when they weren't getting their home supplies. So I had to kind of be on call, right, when there were problems, which really, I remember my mother-in-law, we were in Florida one time. My mother-in-law is like, "Why are you on a work call?" And I'm like, "Cuz I have to be. Otherwise this patient could die if I don't," right? And that's where I think, and I loved it, and I loved to serve, but at the same time, I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish I could somehow, you know, couldn't there be somebody else to do this while I'm on vacation? And we did figure that out later on down the road, but it didn't, when it would take me away from baseball games, when it would take me away from birthdays, and again, I had a part to play in that. Exactly like you. I love the fact that you took full ownership in that. I had to say yes. And to be quite honest, I always said yes because I was afraid if I say no, then what if my loyalty to the company is questioned? And if my loyalty to the company is questioned, what happens to my income, my livelihood, my family? If I'm not the guy who's all in, they're going to find somebody else who's all in. So there was like this fear that was going on that if I don't say yes to those things and say no to the things that, quite frankly, I look back on, they were way more meaningful, you know, that's I had a part to play in that, and that's where it did start to wear on me, just like you were saying. And I imagine you, as well as your clients, and I would love to maybe hear one or two client stories of just reasons that they have to, just when it comes to their jobs and what they're doing, like, what reasons are men giving these days of how it's draining life out of them, but they just don't know what to do?
That's a big one. I have conversations probably on average 2 a day with people I've never
Sure.
met before that are facing these pains, and they just feel lost. They feel trapped. They feel caged in this environment, and they have this fear. What if I stop running so hard? What if I step out of the norm? What if I challenge corporate culture and start to create my own system of success at this job? And I think it's this conditioning, right? And you go back, if you've seen the idea of mimetic desire, we look around us and we want the same things that everyone around us wants. So we copy their behavior to get the same things. We think we want the VP position, the managing director, or whatever. We think we want that because those around us are chasing it. So our brain says, let's go after it too. Well, how do we succeed? Let's follow in their footsteps. Let's learn what they did to succeed. And to your point earlier, it goes back generations. Even if you look back probably 30, 40 years, when you're much more in the industrial era where you're one track jobs for an entire career, or at least one career path, you plugged in and you gave it your all and you took the hits at home. And much of that has been handed down generation by generation. So we're following the footsteps of people from 40, 50 years ago, when in fact, it doesn't need to be that way at all. And I look down to like a younger generation with Gen Z right now. They're the opposite end of the spectrum. They'll come into a work environment like,
Right.
whoa, whoa, you're challenging my mental health? I'm upset right now. No, I will not do this. And it's like, that's an oversimplification, I know, of maybe the mentality, but I see it as a the pendulum has swung the other way towards mental health, individuality, preservation of lifestyle and wellness, which I deeply, deeply appreciate. And I think there's this middle ground that most could gravitate towards, where you value yourself as an individual, the life you're trying to create for yourself and your family, to be the father you want to be the husband, to be the person of impact, while doing a great job in an employer environment. Both, I think, are very possible. And you might have to sacrifice something which says, I don't want to be CEO one day. Cool. Well, how do we maintain this space? How do we keep on a more maintainable area where we're not overrun by work? What are the strategies and tactics we can employ to take back our time and energy, to give our best self to being there for family, maybe to building a business on the side, which I did, which created an entire new path for myself, to being of impact, to be there in your community. So you got to understand the trade-offs at play between giving your all at work, giving your all to family, and what's a middle ground that you feel really good about, and design that.
What have you found is the balance? Because I'm sitting here thinking about like my former career like 10 years ago, right?
Mhm.
When I first got into management. That's where I really felt, and I was managing a team of 10 people. I think I had 10 states, so I had travel. And I immediately felt that pressure go from 0 to 60 of like, okay, now it goes on. You're no longer working like this many hours per day. Cause when you add in like travel, like here's the funny thing. I had one mentor of mine go, do you know when you get into executive management, your actually hourly rate decreases? I was like, what do you mean? Because like, I make this salary now and like whatever else. And they're like, yeah, no. Divide that by the number of hours you're on a plane. Divide that by the number of hours you're in a hotel. Divide that by the number of hours you're at a dinner meeting with your other executive suits because you guys need to be doing a team meeting talking about all your people. And also your quarterly business reviews for all the suits that you do, all the boardrooms you have to do when you go to headquarters that you never had to do when you were doing that stuff. What's your hourly rate? And I actually did the math one time, and I was actually being paid about 40% of what I was per hour. And I was like, and I literally looked at it and I was like, what have I done? I thought I wanted to do this. I don't think I want to do this. And I'll never forget the last leg I had in my career. I was the sales director for one of our divisions. And I had this boss, man. She like loved me. She thought like she managed 5 people. My division was the only division that had actually made plans 6 years in a row. And she's like, I want to make you a VP. I want to do this. I want to do this. And I'm like, nope, I'm good. Nope, I'm good. Like cause I had somehow, I did exactly what you were talking about, which I struck this balance of working. I was probably, truth be told, it's probably working 20 hours a week
Mm.
in a full-time job, but I had scaled, I had learned so many cool skills from being an entrepreneur that I had scaled my full-time job into delegation and systems and things where I basically didn't have to have my finger on the button, or I didn't have to be in Munich for this meeting. And it made me way more efficient. My cost for an employee went way down. My numbers actually increased, but it took me forever to learn that. But I remember like telling my boss, like, yeah, no, I'm good. Like, I have no desire to be on conference calls for 9 hours a day. Thank you very much anyway. Right. But, um, but I'm curious as to when is it, do you think most people start to feel that pressure go from 0 to 60 in their career? Do you think it's there from the beginning and they just never let their foot off the gas? Or do you think it's when they suddenly start to get promoted or new
Mm.
jobs? Or when are those steps become more evident?
I think in your first decade or so, let's say the average person graduates college at 22 and then they're new into the workforce. Let's assume they have nothing except debt, right? And that pressure to
Yeah.
create financial cushion, to get the basics in life from maybe a home to a car, to just feel at ease. You can take a small vacation. That pressure to have cushion, especially when you see everyone else around you having so much cushion, it's very real. And I'll say there is a lot to be said for hustling early, climbing ladders early. And not only does it give you personal gain, but it gives you invaluable experience in working with others, leadership, teams, exposure to problem, meaningful missions like you had with the catheter piece, right? Like understanding of what it is to serve that you frankly can't get when you're 25 years old. And the ability to create a foundation for your life. And then earn the right to think differently later, I think is really important. But I think it's like, 10, 15 years is pretty much the common thing I see is when you start to get these new foundations in life. Maybe you have a family, maybe you've been doing the same thing for a while where these life questions come and say like, is this all there is? I'm really bored of this. This is making me miserable. I'm neglecting these people. I'm neglecting my health. I'm neglecting any dreams I once has had as a younger person. Do I really endure this for another 3 decades and then get freedom? Is that really what I'm signing up for? And then you see people all over social and other places which are who are living a much different life. This wasn't visible 10, 15 years ago. Now it's in your face every
Right.
day. And you see these people that are creating mission oriented organizations, creating this hybrid work life thing where you can't differentiate the two and they love it. And you see these new targets, these new aspirations you have for yourself. And the pain of staying in that box becomes all the more acute when you see everyone else or other people living a life that you wish you had. And I feel that contrast becomes so aggravating. Some people erupt. I've gotten to the point, just be truth be told, I didn't expect to be in this business, Larry, but I really believe I'm in the business of saving lives. I didn't think that at first. There are people that come to these calls I have. I call them breakthrough calls where we get to the heart of what you're facing and what the consequences are and what you are really prepared to do about them. Some people will say, if it continues on this way, Matt, I don't know if I'll be here in a year. And you're like, what? Did I really just enter this conversation? Did I really just enter this where the stakes are that high where you don't think you'll still be here in a year if this doesn't get better? And they talk about their spouse, their kids, the life that they'll have to endure because they can't tolerate the current situation anymore. I'm like, wow, the stakes are really high. The stakes are huge. Entire generations and families and livelihoods are at stake if we don't get this right. I see it every day. It's not often talked about publicly. You talk about it as burnout. People just, you think of a hamster wheel, think of working too many hours, but the consequences of saying yes to the corporate cage and not knowing how to get out and be free and use the tools available to you, the consequences are massive if you don't know how to do that.
I 100% agree, man. I think don't you think that that's what most people don't even realize because they're so far into, we call it the drift. The drift is that daily wash, rinse, repeat, get up, do the same thing. It's almost like you're on autopilot. You're conscious, right? You're well aware, but you constantly do the exact same things and it just becomes this drift. And I think a lot of people, you get to sit in front of the people who are curious about like, is there another way? And if so, what could that look like? It's almost like this beautiful productive pause, right, in their life. And most people, I would say, don't even get to that point. They get to that point when things are too late, when their kids are older and they don't want anything to do with them, or their teenagers have no connection with them whatsoever because they didn't put in the time when they were younger. Quick, interesting story. We had a guy, we have two programs. One is for dad business owners and one's for not dad business owners. Wealthiest guy in our group by far. Um, he just sold his company for $40 million. And he came and did, same as you, did a discovery call with me about our Dad Edge boardroom business mastermind. And I was, I saw his application and I saw the information. I was a bit perplexed. I was like, why is this guy in front of me? I kind of had a feeling of what was going to come out, but I didn't know. And so got to know him for a good 15 minutes. And he told me, he's like, yeah, we just sold our business for $42 million. And he was in tears. And I asked him, I was like, what's going on, man? Why are you crying? This, what every person wants, right? And he's like, yeah, I thought so. He goes, I've been working for this for as long as I can remember. He's like, I have three sons, 10, 8, and 6. They don't want much to do with me. And if I would have known that this is what $40 million would bring, I'm sitting here telling you and everybody else, you chasing that golden ticket. If your kids don't want much to do with you, it ain't worth it, man. He's like, luckily, I have a really great wife. We're still married. And my kids are young enough to where I can totally recalibrate this whole thing. And I'm going to. And he joined our group. And, but to hear that, I mean, like, we all know the importance of family and connections and all these things. But to see a guy who's quote unquote made it and is in tears and he crossed that finish line, and then you see the cost that came with that, it's a good reminder to all of us of like, hey man, if a guy who just made 40 million bucks can hit that productive pause and be like, think about this, think about what you're doing, doesn't that give us all permission to take a look?
Damn well better, man. And we
Yeah.
like to think that we'll get to it later. We'll get to mending the relationships later. We'll get to our health later. We'll get to all this important stuff later. Later never comes, or it's too late at that point. Well, they say you get 18 summers with kids. Okay, you've wasted 10 with them. Great. That was their foundational time. Now you've got to recalibrate with a few
Yeah.
years left before they're the independent, self-seeking teenagers that they're going to be. That leads to a lifetime of regret. You will never forget that. Ask Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, when he was giving his last words to Walter Isaacson in his biography, Walter would say, like, aren't you so proud of all that you've accomplished? Well, how does that compare to being a father? And he goes, being a father was 10,000 times better than anything I did as an entrepreneur. And he deeply, deeply regretted how he was not there for them, obsessively focusing over business. And if Steve Jobs, who creates these wonderful little devices that changed our world, thinks parenting was 10,000 times better than that, whew, do we have a lot of work in front of us?
100%. I completely agree with that. You know, I've heard this 18 summers. When we first started our mastermind back in 2016, I'll never forget this guy. His name was Adam. He came and did life with us. And it was the first time I ever heard that term 18 summers. I'll never forget him for that. And something about 18 summers really hit me, and it hit me hard. I was like, oh, wow, that created some urgency. But here's more urgency. And it's exactly what you just said. Personally, I think it's more like 6 to 7. And I'll share with you why. When they're like 1 to 4, their video camera isn't even really kind of switched on yet. You know, it's like they're just sort of like they're a baby toddler, right? It's not until they're like 5 that that video camera starts to get turned on, and they're like, okay, I know dad, and we all know who dad is, but like I understand what's kind of happening now, right? And then you really only have from like 5, me personally, I think 11 to 12 to really go all in, because so many people, I just put this post out on social. Luckily, I've got this fantastic relationship with my teenagers. Like it's unbreakable in my opinion, but it came with a ton of work, right? It came with harnessing those early years and connecting with them and still doing work. But I always heard from people, oh, just wait till they're a teenager. It gets way worse. Oh, just wait till they're a teenager. They won't want anything to do with you. Wait till they're a teenager. You're going to become unimportant. They're not even going to listen to you. And I have yet, knock on wood, I've yet to see that happen. But I think it's because you've got this incredible window of like 5 years old to 12 to just go all in with everything you got, right? On connecting with them, spending time with them. Because, yeah, Todd Herman, who wrote the book, the Alter Ego Effect, quoted a statistic, which is 80% of your one-on-one time with your kids is gone by the time they're 12. And that's because, and you know it, you got teenagers and so do I. The attention, the competition for your attention gets very competitive. with their friends and their girlfriends and their boyfriends and their devices and all this other stuff. So I think if you really want to hit the ground running for any man who is in the professional workspace and you're feeling this, if your kids are in that age range, now's the time, don't you think?
It's like The Power of Regret in Dan Pink's book. You know, you can
Oh
use
yeah.
regret as one of the most powerful emotions you will ever have. You can learn from past regrets, the pains you've experienced, like me in Munich on the floor missing my son's first birthday. If things carry on this way, you can anticipate future regrets, right? How will this impact my family? How will I feel? What regrets do I anticipate having? And then you use that past knowledge and that future knowledge to do your best to act now. There is nothing guaranteed other than this second and this second and this second. Like, thank you for spending this time with me right now, Larry. And I'm also thinking about right after this, how am I going to go be there for my family? Like, this is a very grounding
Yeah,
conversation with you right now. But man, regret's a powerful emotion if you use it to your advantage. Otherwise, it's just going to swarm you later in life.
I agree. I I'd really like to highlight a story here. Now we've got tons of guys who come and do life with us, and they turn their marriage around, turn their kids around, turn their mindset around, all that. But I would love for you to identify somebody that you worked with, because what I want the audience to do is, as they hear this story, they'd be like, "Man, that's part of me," or "That's all of me," and just for them to understand what this person that you might have worked with was going through. What were some of their they came to you and they're like, listen, man, this is what's going on. Can you help me somehow turn this around? I would love for you to share what they were faced with, what you did about it with this person, and what they're maybe enjoying now because of it.
Yeah, happy to. One person comes to mind right now. It's a very recent example. A dad of two. He early 40s, very successful financer career, 2 decades in, and was climbing ladders furiously after an upbringing that said, money is scarce. You better go like hell and earn it. Otherwise, bad things happen in your life. So this is his programming. Jumped into the career, did everything possible, climbed ladders, started checking boxes. Again, reached early 40s, kids that are about 8 and 10 at that point, and came out of nowhere, reached out to me and said, I've hit a wall. I haven't told anyone about this. Everyone thinks I'm happy and successful. Even my wife thinks that, but I'm freaking miserable. I don't know if I can carry on this way. I'm not meant to do this. This stuff bores me. I can't deal with the BS at work that is dominating my mind. I can't turn it off. I'm trying to be there with my family. Sure, I'm there, but I'm not really there. And that's intolerable to me, knowing that I'm missing my kids' lives. I'm literally the coach of their basketball team. And I'm not there coaching basketball, even though I'm physically there. And that's not okay. And really taking action to say, okay, what do we need to do? So we worked with this fellow, and he was struggling to just turn off work, keep it going. But we worked to say, how do we minimize the hold that work has over you? So we were able to put in some strategies and tactics, focus on the essential things, redesign the work week, understand how to carve out precious time in the morning for himself so that he could be healthier, so that he could end up building his own business, which he wanted to do as well, because he wanted to leave corporate eventually, but just freed up the constraints of corporate, reduced a ton of time that he was spent there, said no to most things going forward, rebuilt his role at work so it wasn't so widespread and he wasn't interacting with so many people. So just stepped away from the job while maintaining the paycheck. That's the first point. Like, get that thing on autopilot, and then started asking him, okay, what are your gifts? What are the things that light you up inside? How do we surface those things? And then he said, well, I want that. How do I build a business around it? So we started asking yourself, like, what's your zone of genius? What does that look like? What lights you up? What sets your heart on fire? And started creating a unique business, which was a full expression of him. Much like I think you and I, Larry, like, we've built something which is so deeply meaningful to us. Not everyone wants to do this, of course, but some people feel so compelled to just create work and life as this harmonious thing. And that's what we were able to build for him. So he kept the day job, built the side business, got that rolling, and it was secret for a while. He didn't tell the employer, kept it on the down low, but became happier, healthier, more present with his family. Ironically, he even got better in his job, started getting better raises and recommendations and such at work. It's funny how that works, much like with you. When you free up, you
Right.
actually get better. You get the respect for you goes up in that organization as you value yourself. So now he's on a trajectory to soon exit the corporate environment. It's no longer serving him. He's keeping that available for now with the paycheck and such, much like your story. But he's reaching the end of that runway, and we're creating a path to say, okay, this is what a life of your own design looks like. Here's how a business of your own design supports that. Here's how you be the person at home that you dream of being. Let's give it a go. So it's a very careful process to get there, and you got to be very you don't want to disrupt the apple cart at work. Got to be careful, but it's working really well for people like him.
I think that's really key because I really think people can be very irresponsible when it comes to decisions. When it comes to, I personally think, it's just my personal opinion. I think it's really not a good idea to like burn the boats and the bridge and then you just free fall from here. Uh, I actually have a funny story about this, which first mastermind I ever joined, Aaron Walker, which is from Iron Sharpens Iron, back in 2015. I had just launched my book, and this is hilarious now that I even think about it. And I sold 400 copies in one day. I made like, I don't know, like $2,000 or something like that, and sold it when I first launched the book. And I called up Aaron and I was like, dude, that's it, man. I'm quitting my job. I'm going full force with this. And I think I just texted him. I did. I texted him and he called me and he's like, what are you doing? And this is a guy who's in his 60s and was a millionaire at 27. And they've been married for 30 plus years. God fearing, faith based guy, and an incredible coach and best friends with Dave Ramsey. And he goes, what are you thinking, man? Like he's from Nashville. He's like, hey, man, what are you thinking? And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, quitting your job, man. And he's like, I was just like, well, I just sold all these books. Like, dude, it's go time, man. It's time to burn the boats. He's like, Larry, I'm gonna tell you this because I love you, man. He's like, you do that, you ain't gonna be married in 2 months. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, listen, he's like, our wives and our family have a deep desire for financial safety. You do that, you are gonna really throw a curveball into not only the connection with your wife and your family, but also into this mission because then you're gonna get desperate. He's like, I highly encourage you to just trust the process, build this thing slowly and very strategically. And then once you've reached to the point where you can let go, then let go, but don't do it foolishly. And I thought to I was so inspired by all these influencers that you see on social being like, just burn the bridges, jump off the cliff, blow the parachute on the way down. I think that's maybe okay if you're single and you've got some savings and you don't have mouths to feed and diapers to buy and bottles and a wife that doesn't work anymore. And I also, I think it could be more of a fun game of chess versus like, I'm just going to jump off this cliff and see what happens.
Dude, it's like most people think it's one of two options, right? Climb the ladder and endure all that crap, or screw the 9 to 5 and go leap. That is two opposite ends of the spectrum. Get
Yeah.
to an intelligent middle ground, like you're saying. Your mentor there was super wise. I think a good job that pays well, has great benefits, and has the ability, like you can customize it some, that is one of the greatest assets in your life. And if you
Yeah.
learn to manipulate it, so that everyone wins, the employer and you, that is a gift to your future self to use that well. But you've got to be bold enough to assert yourself, not let it control you, but you control it. And again, you're not trying to screw over an employer. That's not it. It's about being the right person in the job, doing the things you're best at, focusing on essential outcomes. They win in that situation, and so do you, because you're not trying to do everything, but being careful, thoughtful, building a strategy that's right for your life situation. Like that takes some real skill. Like when I was leaving corporate, I set my task 6 months out. I set my date that I would leave. And every single night, Larry, I was working with my coach and I wrote down a visualization I read to myself, which was 2 days before I was going to hold what I called a freedom party, where I'd invite my closest friends and family over and we would celebrate my impending resignation on the food we would have, the drinks we would have, the
Oh
music,
my
all that good
God.
stuff. And I read that
That's
thing
awesome.
every single night. And truth be told, like that Saturday, we held the party, the freedom party, exactly like I'd been programming in my head for 2 months. And when I quit on the Monday, it didn't really hurt. I wasn't that scared because I'd conditioned in my mind, say, this is inevitable. Of
Yeah.
course, this is happening. So my brain wasn't freaking out. But you've got to have those sorts of structures in place to be able to make such a big move.
Yeah, and make it a celebration, right?
Yeah.
Make it like this impending thing that we get to do, right? We get to look forward to. The other thing too, that I really want to highlight. I don't think we highlighted it enough, but I think if we let's just take somebody who's in the corporate setting or in a job that maybe they sort of despise, or like this 42-year-old or the 40-year-old guy that you said it was just draining the life out of him. I think when we put the pieces together and we can do the work in our organization, we call it do the work that makes you come alive, right? Bring value to others and all that. But when you're in the drift, right, which what we talked about, and you're just doing the wash, rinse, repeat, put my head down, just do this job, just do this role. Once you start to really, even if you're in a corporate gig, once you start to look at different things that, hey, what am I really good at? What are things that that bring me joy, bring me to life, bring value to others, that light me up? And maybe I can delegate some of the other things or get a VA to do certain things, even in a corporate setting, if that's feasible for you, just certain things like that. But ways that you can do the things that bring you more joy, because a more joyful employee, someone who feels like they're on fire in the workplace, they're going to be more productive. They're going to be better, right? And they're going to enjoy their time. We're going to enjoy them being there as well. In our organization within Dad Edge, we run it like Southwest Airlines. We want you to be mentally, emotionally, physically healthy, right? Everything's got to strike a balance. If you need to go spend time with your kids, go spend time with your kids. We're not going to take you away from that. If you need to go on a trip with your wife, to decompress, go on a trip with your wife, come back better, right? That's the way we run things here. And I think that's the way you can't be a slave driver. You can't treat people like a cog in the wheel. But it's also our duty, I think, if we are the cog in the wheel, to raise our hand and say, I don't have this all figured out. Maybe I'm going to call Matt and he can help me put the pieces together to where I'm not doing those things.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And I believe that when the individual is living a healthy, exciting, controlled life, then they're better wherever they go, whether it's at
Yeah.
home or whether it's at work. And I have this message to employers all the time when I work with corporate organizations would be, how do you value the individual and do your best from where you sit to make their lives great, to feel valued, unconstrained. In turn, they will love you for it. They will bring their best. They will be on fire. They will deliver max value. And it's perfect human psychology. Of course, when you say it that way, you understand it. But it takes some brave leaders and it takes the brave individual to assert themselves and not just say yes to the cage, which is just a mental state. Instead, you assert yourself. The employer says, cool, I'm good with this relationship. Let's roll.
100%, man. What have we not talked about? Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think would be meaningful?
Yes, there's a very common theme I see, Larry, with people I talk to. And again, I work with people that are mostly like senior corporate professionals, 15 plus years, very successful. And they're like wanting to get out of the situation that's controlling them, it's making them feel caged. And I see a common path, which would be like, let's create a real estate portfolio. Let me get passive income in motion. And I think it's very dangerous to let that be your sole focus for creating freedom. One, because it takes a really long time to say buy a rental property or have a share in a multifamily condominiums or something like that. And that is a slow path. And I think it turns you passive. Passive income can turn people passive. And you just put a little bit of money each month to freedom, like a 401k. All the while, I'm like, how do you get more active? Don't assume that you have tomorrow or next year. How do you make amazing money? How do you do things you love now, not deferring it? How do you use all your talents? How do you self-discover who you're capable of? Going back to entrepreneurship, I think if you are actively creating a business, that is the accelerator for more freedom for you than anything else. Something like passive income over a long period of time, while it's a good tool, if that's your sole path out of a tough situation, you're going to be waiting for a long time, probably in corporate for as long as most people. But I really hope people to become more active, to harness their gifts, surface them, shine light on them, do something with them outside of what an employer allows them to do. Because you have so much value you can give in this world, so much impact, so much great money that you can make in return for that beautiful exchange of service, whatever you're talented at. But you've got to do the work to uncover what lights your soul on fire, what you're great at, and then put it into action using some systems that'll make it real. Just don't wait around for decades because you're going to be left full of regret.
I agree. You have time for one more question?
Let's roll.
By the way, I love everything you just said because I think it's most men go to their grave harboring their regrets, but also the oh God, how does it go? I'm gonna butcher it. It's something along the lines of their most beautiful hymns that they never shared with the world, which means like your gifts, right? But the other question that I have for you is it's right around that. It's right around this life of regret. And I think it's a perception that people have. And I want you to, I'm not going to give you any instruction. I have my own viewpoint on this, but most of us think we're under the impression for me to make money and for it to be noble, I should probably somewhat dislike it to some degree, not like it at all. I shouldn't be passionate about it because, well, that's really shameful and guilty or guilt ridden if I make money doing something I love. Most men are under the impression that in order for me to make a killer living, I should probably kind of not like what I do. I don't even know where that ever came from or why.
That's been passed
I'd love
down.
to know your view.
Yeah, that's been
Yeah,
passed down
yeah,
generation by generation. I mean, go back to the post World War II when everyone plugged in, came home from the war, and did jobs that were handed to them. We got onto assembly lines. We got into eventually information environments. We started plugging into early computers. You're just thankful to have a job. Like most people in that time were thankful to have a job. And that whole mindset gets passed down. Pick a sensible job, pick a good default path. Passions be damned. Passions aren't where money is. You got to create a good living. You're the man of the family. You've got to do what's right. Pick something sensible, son. You're like, well, I guess I'll be a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant. And then lo and behold, you never really liked it. It kind of makes you miserable, but you don't know any other stories. You don't know any other people that have done anything like the intense self discovery, figuring out what the world needs and would pay for and would value, and which you are uniquely situated to offer. That takes serious work. But my God, and you know this, it is so worth it once you understand what's possible. When you surround yourself with people that are doing things like this, you start experimenting. Like the first dollar I ever made online as an entrepreneur was so life changing. Going 0 to 1, Larry, I don't know what it's like for you, but I was like, whoa, this is possible. I don't have a W-2. I don't like, I'm my own thing. I'm my own legal entity. People just paid me for me and what I have to offer. Like your whole world opens up. Mental models just explode and new ones come in. And you start to want different things, to be a different person. You sense what's possible. And frankly, you've taken the red pill and there's no looking back at that point. It's a beautiful transition. But most people have to get to this point where they're just kind of erupting inside. They can't take it anymore. That's when you go find the others. That's when you find people that are doing things like what we're talking about, because they'll help you guide
yeah.
you to where you want to be.
So well said, man. I'm so glad I'm glad I asked that question and we ended on that because I really do think that if you could do the work that you love, bring value to someone else and improve their life and put food on your table, that is the trifecta that is incredible. And the same mentor, Aaron, the one from Nashville, he told me that most people feel guilty with that. He's like, that, my friend, is a beautiful life. do something that you're passionate about, that you love, find a way to make money at it, bring value to somebody else, change their life because of it, and put food on your table. What better life is there than to be able to do that and wake up and be excited about what you do? Matt, I want to give you an opportunity here as we wrap up. Where's the best place for people to find you and potentially discover what it's like to work with you?
Yeah, hop on over to Uncage Yourself. It's my podcast. Go check that out right now. Bookmark it. I give as much value and strategy and tactics and just everything I have rawly, like we're talking about here. I bring forward the questions and everything that people are dealing with. I just try to give as much as I can as a coach there. So go bookmark Uncage Yourself. That's some of my best stuff out there. I have a coaching program called Uncaged Life Design, where people do the work because it takes real work. But short and sweet, man. Go check out the podcast and just start there. There's tons for you to start using right now.
Yeah, guys, you can't miss it. I just listened to actually just yesterday the Building Your Corporate Off Ramp. It was a great podcast by Matt. Some of his podcasts are an hour, some are just a handful of minutes, but you can't miss it. It's him, Uncage Yourself, big, bright, and green. Him with a black shirt on it. We'll have a link in the show notes for you. Head on over to thedadedge.com / let me get that link for you guys. Let me say that one more time. 5. Head on over to thedadedge.com / 438 for this show. Again, thedadedge.com / 438 for this show. This is where you're going to find Matt, his podcast, his website, his services, and connect with him. If you're anything like lost souls like he and I were, this might be something that you might want to go check out. So, Matt, thank you so much for all you're doing. This is life-giving. I would say life-changing, but it's life-giving what you're doing because it gives people back their life. So thank you for what you're doing.
You bet. And if people want to jumpstart, check out episode 89, like you just said there. Your corporate off-ramp is one of the most important things you can be doing in your world right now. But Larry, it's absolute pleasure just to be alongside with you on a similar mission. You're doing amazing stuff. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you, brother. I appreciate you. Gentlemen, that's all we got for you today. Go out, live legendary. You only got one life to live. Take care, gentlemen.